Greetings, everyone. Susan Anderson here, and thank you so much for taking the time to tune in to my persuasive speech. I'm going to start off with a word. That word is parachute. Yes, parachute. And then I'm going to follow that word up with a question. The question is, what thoughts come to mind when someone mentions the word parachute? Now, you all should have some up there because I've mentioned the word 3 times already. If someone was to ask me, the first reaction would be risk, uncertainty. I mean, we know we're going to end up on the ground, but we don't know how we're going to get there. We don't know if we're going to get there in one piece. We don't know when we're going to get there. We don't know if anything's going to go wrong. Agree? I would also say parachutes are quite colorful, multifaceted. The third thing I would say is they are huge. They're kind of massive. And not only are they massive, they compact into this tiny little object. And then lastly, I would say the beauty of the environment, the scenery, if I was to be jumping out of a plane that I hope to see. And I say that because there's always the chance that there's going to be a horrific sight, whether that's below or around me. Now, I asked you a very random question, and now I'm going to ask you to do something just even more bizarre. Take that question and all the thoughts behind it, and let's just stick it here in a compartment in our brain. And what I'd like to do is, or what I would like to do is take you somewhere else. And where that somewhere else is to the 70s. Yes! 70s disco era platform shoes and big afros, bigger than mine. And of course, those bell-bottom jeans. Now, the 70s. Why am I mentioning the 70s? Well, the 70s was a time that the use of psychedelic drugs blew up. Yes, psychedelic drugs. Now, Albert Hofmann, who was a Swedish scientist, in 1943, he actually discovered LSD. LSD is a psychedelic substance. A couple more substances that we'll touch on today is MDMA, which is a component found in ecstasy, which is a street drug. And then the third one is psilocybin. Most people know that as magic mushrooms. Psilocybin has been medically prescribed, I want to say, since the 70s, but don't quote me on that because that's not 100%. Look that up. Now, when Albert Hofmann discovered this, I highly doubt he had any idea of the usage of LSD outside of what it was mainly used for between the 1950s and the 1960s. And what was that, you might ask? Well, psychedelic substances were used for treatment for alcoholism and other emotional disorders with much success. And I could tell you one of the studies that was done included it was 40,000 subjects. So 40,000 patients were seen for this type of treatment, psychedelic treatment. That's what we've branded it, labeled it. Out of those 40,000, that generated over 1,000 articles being written about the benefits, just full exposure, not only the benefits, some of the downsides of psychedelic treatment. Thankfully, most of it was positive. So that came out, as a result. And with these 40,000 subjects, over 50% have reported long-term effects of abstinence. That's just astounding because you look at today and alcoholism and how difficult it is to treat. Now, going back to the 70s, it was also the time of the Vietnam War, which was just a tragic event. And Kimberly Amadeo, now she happens to be the founder of World Money Worth. And she claims that the Vietnam War cost $168 billion. Yes, I'll say that again. $168 billion. And if that wasn't profound enough, in today's standards, that's equivalent to $1 trillion. Now, why am I all of a sudden talking about the Vietnam War and money when I thought the subject was on psychedelic drugs and healing? Stay with me. This was 1970s. President Nixon was in the White House. The United States is a capitalist nation. Bottom line, we made money off of that war. How does that tie in to psychedelics and LSD? Well, because of the widespread popularity, what we have labeled as hippies were very strong in unity. And these hippies, yes, they experimented. And once they experimented, they realized war is stupid. Love is the answer. Enlightenment, consciousness. I want to look to my left and say, you're my brother. I want to look to my right and say, you're my sister. Oh, and war is stupid. Okay? This was the general consensus of the hippies. Now, how does that tie in to the quotes about the money and President Nixon? Well, if the hippies were going to ban war, and they were starting to be very effective, if they were going to ban war, America was at risk for not making all that money. So Richard Nixon in 1970 inducted into law the Controlled Substances Act, which made these psychedelic drugs, most specifically LSD, illegal. And all of the positive trials, treatments that were done, all of that was thrown out and not looked at with respect or as honorable because so much propaganda was put forth about how drugs are bad, and that's it. Now, moving to New Hampshire in 2021, even going back to 2015, I bet you if I asked anyone in this audience if they knew someone who they were close to, or they knew of someone who was dealing with an aspect that had to do with addiction, specifically the opioid crisis, I don't think one person in this audience would sit there without their hands raised. We all know, in a sense, the effects of drug use, specifically street drugs. However, the opioid crisis has come from prescription drugs, okay? Drugs have been labeled presumed, which means there has been reasoning why people believe this, okay? A presumption means, well, experience in my past says it's so, so it is so. It's not an assumption, it's a presumption, okay? I'm here to suggest that not all drugs are bad, even though drug addiction can be the reason why people lose their jobs, lose their families, why kids are displaced and put into foster homes, why bank accounts are emptied out, why in some cases illegal acts are committed like they're normal. The list can go on, and with the top one being overdose. Yes, there are some bad things that come along with the use of street drugs. I do want to say this, though, because a lot of people want to talk about addiction and how addiction is the problem. Well, if I had to quote Ben Sessa, who is a psychologist out of the UK, United Kingdom, he goes on to say, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little, or maybe not, because I feel very strongly that I know exactly what he said. Ben Sessa feels very strongly that addiction has nothing to do with the availability of drugs. If it did, we would look at alcoholism and go, oh no, everyone is going to use alcohol because it's legal for everyone over 21. That's not everything that Ben Sessa said, by the way. Ben Sessa does say drug use has nothing to do, or addiction has nothing to do with drug use. The availability has nothing to do with addiction, okay? It's past trauma. And trauma needs to be handled and dealt with. It needs to be worked through instead of applying Band-Aid treatments to it. And in my opinion, in a lot of instances, Band-Aid treatments are prescription medication that says, here, take this, you'll feel better. For those treatment-resistant patients who therapy just doesn't work, what are we going to do? Do you know what I mean when I ask these questions? Street drugs have a negative. Street drugs have a positive. Please be open to that. And please also be open to the idea that addiction is not the problem. It's trauma. And when we're talking about MDMA, which is a component of ecstasy, MDMA is specifically used to treat people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And we're talking people like firemen, policemen, first responders, veterans, people who were in war. A lot of them are considered treatment-resistant patients and have found that this psychedelic treatment works in a controlled set and setting. So important, controlled set and setting. Okay? Now, I do want to give you some examples, or just one example, I think one is enough, of how MDMA can help. Out of 107 subjects, 96% of them claim to have benefited from the MDMA treatment. 92.9% have reported lasting effects out of those 96%, and 53.2% out of that 96%. This is astounding. They claim continued benefits along with growth. Growth is so huge. They continue to evolve and grow. To tell you a little bit about my story, and I'm going to be very brief about this, there came a point in 2016 where I was filled up with undealt trauma and really, as a seeker, wanted to do something for healing. I had been to retreats, groups, I had been to multiple therapists, been a guinea pig with prescription medication many times over, and it wasn't working. So I found myself on a plane to South America, Peru to be exact, to partake in a 10-day silent retreat where we would have opportunities to do 3 different ayahuasca ceremonies. Ayahuasca is a psychedelic drug. And when I talk about the importance of set and setting, the setting was nice. It was good. We had a maloca, which is a hut, very ceremonial. We had our shamans in place. We had a therapist on the floor and a nurse and some other helpers. And I will tell you that out of the 3 ceremonies, it was difficult. In my last ceremony, I was quite sure I almost physically died. Now, why do I say this? The setting was nice because it wasn't complete. Not everyone spoke English. You need to be able to communicate when you're going through something as intense as that. I believe I had altitude sickness and their medical equipment wasn't working. Unless those numbers were right, I'd probably be dead. Those numbers weren't right. Anyway, and then set. What does that mean? Mindset. Have you been eating well over the past few days? Have you done illegal drugs? Are you feeling at a general peace? Are you okay? Did you just get in a fight with someone? If you answer yes, then hold on. Do some more work and then try this. I think it's just really important to have an open mind where this is concerned. And I want to tie this up with mentioning that, headways have been made. Oregon, Colorado, a couple of cities in California, they have legal psilocybin use, mushroom use. In Oregon, it's in a controlled set and setting. According to NewYorkTimes.com, New York is now the 15th state to legalize recreational marijuana, which is also considered a hallucinogen. With all that being said, tying it back to our lovely parachute and the similarities between psychedelic drugs and the parachute, I want to leave you with this quote from Frank Zappa. The mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. Thanks.